I was staring out my kitchen window at 7 in the morning when I watched Brenda Zimmerman's silver Lexus plow straight into the massive snow bank. I had spent 3 hours building along my driveway the previous evening. The impact sent a cascade of white powder exploding across her windshield, and I could see her face turn an alarming shade of crimson even from 50 feet away. My name is Zachary Edwards, and I had lived in the Cedar Ridge subdivision of Naperville, Illinois for exactly 2 years, 11 months and 16 days. I knew the precise count because I had been keeping track ever since Brenda became the president of our homeowners association 6 months after I moved in. She had made it her personal mission to ensure that every single resident followed the increasingly absurd rules she kept adding to the community guidelines. Last month, she had tried to fine me for having my trash cans visible from the street for more than 2 hours on collection day. The month before that, she sent me a formal warning because my mailbox post needed repainting, even though I had painted it just that summer. But this snow bank situation was going to be something else entirely. I had cleared my driveway yesterday evening after the latest winter storm dumped 14 inches of wet, heavy snow across the Chicago suburbs. The city plow had come through around midnight, pushing an additional mountain of compacted snow and ice across the end of every driveway on our street. Standard practice, I knew, but it left everyone with extra work. I had gotten up at 5 this morning to finish clearing the mess, and I had done what any reasonable person would do. I pushed all that snow into a neat, compact bank along the right side of my driveway, on my own property, well within my property line. I grabbed my coat and headed outside as Brenda extracted herself from her vehicle. She was wearing a cream-colored wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and her perfectly styled blonde hair barely moved in the winter wind. She had to be in her mid-40s, but she dressed and acted like she was running for mayor of a small town rather than managing a subdivision HOA. "Zachary Edwards," she shrieked before I even made it down my front steps. "Do you see what you have done? Do you see this?" I approached carefully, my boots crunching through the snow. "Good morning, Brenda. Are you all right? That looked like quite an impact." "Do not good morning me," she snapped, her breath creating little clouds in the freezing air. "You deliberately created a hazardous condition on this street. This snow bank of yours is a menace, and I could have been seriously injured." I looked at my snow bank, then at her car, then back at the snow bank. The logic did not quite add up. "Brenda, that snow bank is completely on my property. It is at least 4 feet from the edge of the road." "How exactly did you manage to hit it?" Her eyes narrowed to slits. "I was pulling over to take photographs of your mailbox situation." "My mailbox situation? Your mailbox has icicles hanging from it." Section 12. Paragraph 4 of the HOA guidelines states that all fixtures visible from the street must be properly maintained and free from weather damage or deterioration. I stared at her. "Icicles are not weather damage. They are literally just frozen water. They will melt." "That is not the point." She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling either from cold or rage. "The point is that you have now created a dangerous obstruction that caused me to crash my vehicle. I am documenting everything, and I will be filing a formal complaint with the HOA board. You will be responsible for the damage to my car, and you will be fined for creating unsafe conditions." I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. "Brenda, you drove onto my property and hit a snow pile. That is not me creating an unsafe condition. That is you not paying attention to where you were driving." "I am calling the police," she announced, already dialing. "We will let them determine who is at fault here." Part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity of calling the police over a minor fender bender with a snow bank, but I also knew that Brenda was dead serious. She had that look in her eyes, the one she got whenever she felt someone was challenging her authority as HOA president. I had seen her get 3 families fined over the past year for violations that ranged from questionable to completely made up. 2 officers from the Naperville Police Department arrived about 20 minutes later. I had gone back inside to warm up while Brenda sat in her car with the engine running, presumably so she could claim whiplash or some other injury from the devastating impact with loosely packed snow. Officer Martinez and Officer Thompson both looked like they would rather be anywhere else on this freezing January morning. "So let me get this straight," Officer Martinez said after hearing both of our accounts. He was a stocky man in his 30s with the patient expression of someone who dealt with nonsense like this regularly. "You drove off the road and hit a pile of snow that was on private property, and you want to file a report claiming the homeowner created a hazard." "Yes, exactly," Brenda said, apparently missing the skeptical tone in his voice. "He deliberately piled that snow there to create an obstruction. It is clearly visible from the road and poses a danger to anyone driving by." Officer Thompson, a younger woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun, walked over to examine my snow bank. She poked it with her boot, and her foot sank in about 6 inches. "Madam, this is just regular snow that was cleared from the driveway. It is on private property, and it does not extend into the street or onto any public right-of-way." "But I hit it," Brenda protested. "Because you drove off the road," Officer Martinez said gently. "Mr. Edwards has not violated any traffic laws or ordinances. You, however, were operating your vehicle off the roadway without justification." Brenda's face went from red to almost purple. "I had justification. I was documenting HOA violations." "That does not give you the right to drive onto someone's property," Officer Thompson said. "If anything, you could potentially be charged with trespassing or reckless driving." "This is outrageous," Brenda shouted. "I am the president of the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association. I have every right to inspect properties for violations." Officer Martinez shook his head. "No, madam, you do not. The HOA does not have the authority to trespass on private property. Your CCRs might give you the right to conduct inspections, but you need to follow proper procedures, which I am guessing involves notice and permission." I had been quiet during most of this exchange, but I could not help myself. She is right about the CCRs allowing inspections, but they have to provide 48 hours written notice, and the homeowner has the right to be present or to refuse entry to the interior of the home. Brenda whirled on me. "You think you are so smart, do you not? Always reading the fine print, always looking for loopholes. Well, I am going to make sure the board hears about this. You are going to be fined and you are going to pay for my car repairs." Officer Martinez cleared his throat. "Madam, I strongly suggest you contact your insurance company about your vehicle. As for any HOA issues, that is a civil matter that we cannot get involved in. But I need to be clear. There is no police report to be filed here that would support your claim. Mr. Edwards has done nothing wrong." After the officers left, Brenda sat in her car for another 10 minutes, presumably calling other board members to complain about me. I went back inside and made myself a strong cup of coffee. My wife Sarah had left for a week-long business trip to Seattle 2 days ago, and I found myself wishing she was here to witness the absurdity. She always said that Brenda was going to eventually push things too far, and I had a feeling we were about to reach that point. Sure enough, I found a formal notice tucked into my screen door when I went to get my mail that afternoon. It was printed on official HOA letterhead and signed by 3 board members: Brenda Zimmerman, President, Michael Foster, Vice President, and Patricia Hendricks, Secretary. The notice informed me that I was being fined $500 for creating unsafe and hazardous conditions on HOA property, and that I had 72 hours to remove the snowbank or face additional daily fines of $100. I read the notice 3 times, my blood pressure rising with each reading. The snowbank was on my property, not HOA property. The street itself was public property maintained by the city. The HOA owned the common areas like the playground, the small park, and the retention pond, but they absolutely did not own the street or my front yard. I spent the next hour digging through my closing documents and the neighborhood plat map. Everything confirmed what I already knew. My property line extended to within 2 feet of the road, which was standard for our subdivision. The snowbank was a good 4 feet from the road, placing it squarely on my land. The HOA had no jurisdiction over where I piled snow on my own property, provided it did not create an actual hazard, which it clearly did not. I drafted a response letter that evening, keeping my tone professional but firm. I pointed out that the snowbank was entirely on my private property, that it did not violate any city ordinances or HOA covenants, and that I would not be paying the fine or removing the snow. I also noted that Brenda had been trespassing when she drove onto my property and crashed into the snowbank, and that any damage to her vehicle was entirely her own responsibility. I printed 3 copies, signed them all, and hand-delivered one to each board member's house that night. Michael Foster opened his door looking confused. He was a tall, thin man in his 50s who worked as an accountant downtown. "Zachary, what is this about? Did Brenda tell you what actually happened this morning?" I asked. His expression told me everything I needed to know. "She said you created a hazardous snow pile that she crashed into while driving down the street." "That is not quite accurate," I said, and I gave him the full story, including the part about her trying to photograph my mailbox icicles. I watched his face go from confused to annoyed to resigned. "Let me guess," he said finally. "She pushed this fine through without actually explaining the circumstances to me and Patricia." "That would be my assumption." He sighed heavily. "I am going to be honest with you, Zachary. A lot of us are getting tired of Brenda's approach to the HOA. She treats it like she is running a police state instead of a neighborhood association. But she is incredibly persistent, and she has a way of making life miserable for anyone who disagrees with her. So you just go along with whatever she wants." "I did not say I was proud of it," Michael said quietly. "Look, send me photos of your property line and the snowbank's location. If you are right about it being entirely on your property, then this fine is bogus, and I will vote to rescind it at the next board meeting." Patricia Hendricks, the secretary, was less sympathetic when I knocked on her door. She was a sharp-faced woman in her early 60s who had retired from a career as a middle school principal. "I reviewed the photos Brenda provided," she said crisply. "That snowbank is excessive and unsightly." "But is it against any HOA rules?" I asked. She hesitated. "It falls under the General Maintenance and Appearance Guidelines." "Which specific section?" "Section 8, regarding maintenance of visible property." I had memorized most of the CCRs by this point. Section 8 refers to maintaining structures and landscaping in good repair. Snow is not a structure, and it is temporary. Unless you are planning to fine everyone who has snow in their yard after a storm, this is selective enforcement. Your tone is not helping your case, Mr. Edwards. I apologize, but I am frustrated. Brenda drove onto my property and crashed into a pile of snow, and now I am being fined for it. That does not seem right. Patricia's expression softened slightly. I will review the matter more carefully. That is all I can promise. The next morning, I woke to find that someone had spray painted a large orange X on my snow bank with the words "Hazard Remove Immediately" stenciled below it. I stood in my driveway in my pajamas and winter coat, staring at the vandalism in disbelief. The orange paint stood out like a beacon against the white snow, visible to everyone driving past my house. I called the police again. This time, Officer Thompson came alone. She took photos and filed a report for vandalism, though she warned me that without witnesses or security camera footage, they were unlikely to catch whoever did it. I did not have security cameras, something I was now seriously reconsidering. "If I had to guess," Officer Thompson said quietly, "this is related to your HOA dispute from yesterday. Do you have any evidence that Miss Zimmerman or another board member might have done this?" "No evidence," I admitted. "But Brenda is the only person who would care this much about a snow pile." "I understand, but I cannot do anything without proof. I would suggest installing cameras and documenting everything going forward. HOA disputes can get nasty." She was right. Over the next week, things escalated in ways I had not imagined possible. First, I received a second notice informing me that my fine had increased to $800 because I had failed to remove the spray-painted snow within 24 hours, which apparently counted as maintaining defaced property visible from the street. The circular logic was maddening. Someone vandalized my property, and now I was being fined for being the victim of vandalism. Then my mailbox disappeared entirely one night. I woke up to find the entire post missing, pulled right out of the ground. This time, I had to file a report for theft and destruction of property. The police took it seriously because mailboxes were federal property. But again, no witnesses and no cameras meant no leads. I bought and installed a Ring doorbell camera and 2 additional security cameras covering my driveway and front yard. The equipment cost me $600, but at this point, I considered it an investment in my sanity and legal protection. Sarah called from Seattle that evening and I filled her in on everything. "This is insane," she said. "Zach, you need to fight back. Officially. Get a lawyer. For an HOA dispute about a snow pile, for harassment, vandalism, and illegal fines. This has gone way beyond a snow pile." She was right, of course. I started researching attorneys who specialized in HOA disputes. There were more of them than I expected, which told me something about how common these situations were. I scheduled a consultation with an attorney named Jennifer Wu for the following Monday. Meanwhile, the snowbank situation resolved itself naturally. The temperature rose to 45 degrees over the weekend, and the snow melted into my yard. The orange spray paint, however, had seeped down to my grass, meaning I would probably have dead patches come spring. I documented everything with photos and detailed notes, including timestamps and weather conditions. The snow might have melted, but Brenda was not done. I received a certified letter on Monday morning informing me that the HOA board had voted to place a lien on my property for unpaid fines totaling $950. The letter stated that if I did not pay within 30 days, they would begin foreclosure proceedings. I called Michael Foster immediately. "Did you actually vote for this lien?" "No," he said, sounding furious. "I voted against it. So did Patricia. Brenda claimed she had the authority to place the lien as president, but I do not think she actually does. The CCRs require a majority board vote for liens exceeding $500. So she is just making up rules now, apparently. Look, Zachary, I am done. I am calling for a special board meeting to address this and to potentially vote on removing Brenda as president. This has gone too far." When is this meeting? I am going to send out notice today for a meeting this Friday night. All homeowners are allowed to attend and speak during the open comment period. I suggest you come prepared. I met with Jennifer Wu on Monday afternoon. She was a sharp woman in her 40s who had been practicing HOA law for 15 years. Her office walls were covered with framed news articles about cases she had won against overreaching associations. "This is one of the more blatant cases I have seen," she said after I finished explaining everything. "The snowbank was clearly on your property. She trespassed and caused her own accident, and now she is retaliating with illegal fines and a potentially fraudulent lien. You have an excellent case for harassment and abuse of authority. What are my options? We can fight the lien and the fines through the dispute resolution process outlined in your CCRs. That typically involves mediation first, then arbitration if mediation fails. We can also file a lawsuit for harassment, defamation, and abuse of process. Given that she vandalized or arranged for the vandalism of your property, we might also have criminal charges to pursue if we can prove her involvement. How much is this going to cost me? My retainer is $5,000. If this goes to arbitration or court, you are looking at potentially $15,000 to $20,000 in legal fees. However, if we win, we can seek to have your attorney fees covered by the HOA, which means Brenda and the board would be paying through the association's funds. I thought about my savings account and my principal. Let us do it." Jennifer drafted a formal response to the lien notice, citing the CCR's requirement for a majority board vote and demanding that the lien be removed within 7 days. She also sent a cease and desist letter to Brenda personally, warning her that any further harassment or retaliation would result in a lawsuit. Both letters were sent via certified mail with return receipt requested. Friday night arrived, and I walked into the Cedar Ridge subdivision clubhouse at 7 in the evening to find it packed. Apparently, word had spread about the special board meeting, and at least 50 homeowners had shown up. The room buzzed with conversation, and I caught snippets about the snowbank incident and Brenda has lost it, as I found a seat near the front. Michael Foster called the meeting to order at 7:15. Brenda sat at the board table looking smug, clearly expecting this to go her way. Patricia Hendricks sat next to her, looking uncomfortable. "This special meeting has been called to address concerns about recent board actions and decisions," Michael began. "Specifically, we need to discuss the fines and lien placed on Zachary Edwards' property, as well as broader questions about HOA governance and president authority." Brenda immediately interrupted. "This is unnecessary. I acted within my authority as president to address a clear violation and safety hazard." "You acted unilaterally," Michael countered. "The CCRs require board votes for fines exceeding $200 and for any liens. You did not have majority support for the lien." "I had Patricia's support." Patricia shook her head. "Actually, you told me you were sending a warning letter, not filing a lien. I did not approve a lien." The room erupted in murmurs. Brenda's confident expression faltered. "That is a mischaracterization of our conversation." "I have the email you sent me," Patricia said, pulling out her phone. "You never mentioned a lien. You lied to me." Michael turned to face the assembled homeowners. "We are going to open this up for community comment, as is required by our bylaws. Anyone who wishes to speak will have 3 minutes. I raised my hand and Michael called on me first. I walked to the front of the room, my printed documentation in hand. "Most of you know me as Zachary Edwards from Maple Street. Some of you have heard about the snowbank incident. I want to tell you exactly what happened and why this matters to everyone here." I laid out the entire timeline, from the initial crash to the vandalism to the illegal lien. I passed around photos showing the snowbank's location on my property, the spray paint vandalism, and the stolen mailbox. I also distributed copies of the police reports and Jennifer Wu's legal analysis of the CCRs. This is not just about me, I concluded. This is about how our HOA is run and who has the power to make our lives miserable over personal grudges. If Brenda can invent violations and fine me for snow on my own property, she can do it to any of you. The room exploded with people raising their hands to speak. Michael worked through them methodically. One after another, homeowners stood up to share their own stories of Brenda's overreach. A man named Robert Chen described being fined for having a basketball hoop in his driveway, even though the CCRs explicitly allowed them. A woman named Susan Crawford talked about getting threatening letters about her garden gnomes, which were accused of being tacky decorations under a rule Brenda had apparently invented. The most damning testimony came from Thomas Wright, who lived 3 houses down from Brenda. "I have security cameras," he said. "And at 2:30 in the morning last Tuesday, I recorded footage of someone matching Brenda's height and build spray painting Zachary's snowbank. I could not see the face clearly because of the hood, but the car in the footage is a silver Lexus with a license plate that matches Brenda's registration." The room went completely silent. All eyes turned to Brenda, whose face had drained of color. "That is absurd," she said, but her voice shook. "I was home in bed. Can anyone verify that?" Michael asked. "My husband can." "Your husband is in Florida visiting his mother," Patricia said quietly. "You mentioned it at our board meeting on Monday." Brenda stood up abruptly, knocking her chair backwards. "I do not have to sit here and be accused of crimes by a mob. This meeting is adjourned." "You do not have the unilateral authority to adjourn a meeting," Michael said firmly. "Sit down, or I will call for a vote to remove you as president right now." "You cannot remove me. I have done everything for this community. You have harassed homeowners, filed false fines, committed vandalism, and lied to the board," Michael said. "Under Section 19 of our bylaws, the board can remove an officer for cause with a 2/3 vote. Given that Patricia and I both vote yes, that is 2 out of 3, which exceeds the threshold." "This is illegal," Brenda shrieked. "I will sue all of you." "Actually, you will not," said a new voice from the back of the room. A woman in a police uniform stepped forward, and I recognized Officer Thompson. "I am here because Mr. Wright contacted me this afternoon with his security footage. I have reviewed it, and I have obtained a warrant for your arrest, Miss Zimmerman." The color drained from Brenda's face completely. "Arrest? For what?" "Criminal mischief and vandalism for the spray painting. We are also investigating the mailbox theft, which is a federal offense. You have the right to remain silent." Watching Brenda get handcuffed in the middle of the HOA meeting was surreal. She alternated between threatening to sue everyone and crying about how unfair this was. Officer Thompson led her out professionally, reading her rights as they walked through the clubhouse doors. The meeting continued after a brief recess. Michael called for an official vote to remove Brenda as president, which passed unanimously with everyone in the room voting yes by show of hands. Patricia was appointed interim president, and Michael made a motion to rescind all fines against my property and to remove the lien. That also passed unanimously. "I want to apologize to you, Zachary," Patricia said formally. "The board failed in its duty to provide proper oversight, and you suffered because of our negligence. The HOA will cover your legal fees and any damages to your property." "I appreciate that," I said. "But I think we need to talk about bigger changes to how this HOA operates." That sparked a 2-hour discussion about reforming the HOA's governance structure. By the end of the night, we had formed a committee to review and revise the CCRs, establish clearer limits on board authority, and create a transparent process for fines and violations. I volunteered to serve on the committee, along with 5 other homeowners who had been targeted by Brenda's overreach. The legal aftermath took several months to fully resolve. Brenda was charged with criminal mischief for the spray painting, which was a misdemeanor in Illinois. She eventually pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 1 year of probation, a $500 fine, and 50 hours of community service. She was also ordered to pay restitution for my damaged lawn and stolen mailbox, which totaled $800. The federal investigation into the mailbox theft took longer. Postal inspectors eventually found evidence linking Brenda to the theft, including her cell phone GPS data placing her near my house during the time window when the mailbox disappeared. She was charged with destruction of mail receptacles, a federal misdemeanor. That earned her another guilty plea, 6 months of probation to run concurrently with her state probation, and a $1,000 fine. Brenda and her husband put their house up for sale in March and moved out of Cedar Ridge in May. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that they relocated to a condo in downtown Chicago, presumably one without an HOA. I could not say I was sorry to see her go. The HOA committee completed its work by April. We streamlined the CCRs from 90 pages down to 35, removing dozens of petty restrictions and clarifying the rules that remained. We established a formal appeals process for violations and required that all fines above $100 be approved by a majority board vote, with evidence presented to the homeowner. We also added term limits for board positions and a recall process that allowed homeowners to petition for special elections. Most importantly, we added a clause that explicitly stated the HOA's purpose was to maintain property values and foster community, not to micromanage people's lives. It seemed obvious, but putting it in writing made a difference in how people approached board service. Patricia served as president for the remainder of Brenda's term, and she did an excellent job. She actually knocked on doors to talk to homeowners before issuing any violation notices, and she worked with people to find solutions rather than just levying fines. It was a radical concept that actually improved community relationships. I was elected to the board myself during the annual meeting in June. I did not particularly want the position, but Sarah convinced me that someone needed to ensure our reform stuck. She was right, as usual. I served as treasurer, which suited my detail-oriented nature and kept me away from the more confrontational aspects of HOA management. The snowbank incident became legendary in our subdivision. New residents would hear the story and ask if it was really true. I would show them the photos and the police reports, and they would shake their heads in disbelief. It became a cautionary tale about what happens when HOAs get too powerful and when petty people get too much authority. Thomas Wright became a close friend after everything was resolved. We would joke about him being my star witness, and he never let me forget that he was the one who cracked the case. His security footage had been the key to everything, and I was profoundly grateful that he had thought to check his cameras and come forward. My mailbox was replaced with a sturdy new one that I installed with extra deep concrete footings. If anyone tried to pull it out again, they would need a tractor. The dead patches on my lawn from the orange spray paint were receded and came back thicker than before. By summer, you could not even tell where the vandalism had occurred. Sarah and I hosted a neighborhood barbecue in July, and more than 30 families showed up. People told stories about dealing with Brenda over the years, laughing now about situations that had seemed infuriating at the time. There was a sense of relief in the community, like we had collectively survived something toxic and come out better for it. The snowbank itself, which had caused so much trouble, became an inside joke. That next winter, when the first big storm hit, at least a dozen families built elaborate snowbanks along their driveways and took photos to post in the neighborhood social media group. Someone created a Snowbank Hall of Fame with pictures of the most creative designs. Mine was not the most impressive, but it won the most controversial award. I learned a lot from the experience about standing up for yourself and about the importance of documentation. I kept every email, every letter, every photo, and every receipt related to the incident. That paper trail had been essential when fighting back against Brenda's abuse of authority. It also taught me that sometimes you have to spend money on lawyers and cameras and other protective measures, because doing nothing can cost you even more in the long run. More than that, I learned about community and the power of people coming together. The special board meeting had been a turning point because homeowners showed up and shared their stories. No one wanted to be the first to speak up, but once I did, others found the courage to share their own experiences. Together, we created change that made our neighborhood better for everyone. The legal fees ended up being covered by the HOA's insurance policy, which had a provision for defending against wrongful actions by board members. The insurance company was not happy about having to pay out, and they apparently dropped the HOA's coverage after the policy year ended. We found new insurance through a different carrier, but the premiums were higher because of the claim. That was a cost everyone shared through increased dues, but most people seemed to think it was worth it to be rid of Brenda and her reign of terror. I still think about that morning sometimes, watching Brenda's Lexus plow into my snowbank. In the moment, it had seemed like just another frustrating encounter with an unreasonable person. I had not imagined it would spiral into vandalism, arrests, HOA reforms, and a complete transformation of our neighborhood governance. Life has a way of taking small incidents and turning them into major inflection points. The experience also changed how I approached conflicts. I used to avoid confrontation, preferring to keep my head down and hope problems would resolve themselves. But Brenda had taught me that some people view avoidance as weakness and will keep pushing until they are stopped. Fighting back legally and publicly had been uncomfortable and expensive, but it was the right choice. It protected not just me but everyone else who might have been targeted in the future. Jennifer Wu became my go-to attorney for any legal questions. She was worth every penny of her retainer, and I recommended her to at least 5 other families dealing with HOA disputes in other subdivisions. She told me that my case had become something of a teaching example in HOA law circles, an illustration of how badly things can go when board members abuse their authority, and how effective it can be when homeowners push back with proper documentation and legal support. By the time the 1-year anniversary of the snowbank incident rolled around, I barely recognized our HOA. The board meetings were well attended but calm. Violations were rare and handled reasonably. People actually liked living in Cedar Ridge again, instead of feeling like they were under constant surveillance. Our property values held steady, while nearby neighborhoods with reputation for aggressive HOAs saw declining interest from buyers. Sarah and I talked about selling and moving to avoid any lingering drama, but we ultimately decided to stay. We had fought too hard to improve our community to abandon it now. Plus, we genuinely liked our house and our neighbors. It felt good to have been part of positive change rather than just complaining about problems or running away from them. The snowbank incident also gave me a certain local celebrity status, that was both amusing and slightly embarrassing. People would introduce me at parties as the guy who stood up to the crazy HOA president, and I would have to retell the story. It always got good reactions, especially the part about Brenda getting arrested at the board meeting. That detail never failed to elicit gasps and laughter. I stayed on the HOA board for 2 full terms, serving 4 years total as treasurer. During that time, we completed several successful community projects, including renovating the playground, adding walking trails around the retention pond, and organizing neighborhood events that actually brought people together. It turned out that when you focused on building community instead of enforcing petty rules, an HOA could be a genuinely positive force. Patricia stepped down as president after 1 term, and Michael Foster took over. He served for 2 years before passing the role to Susan Crawford, the woman who had spoken up about the garden gnome controversy. Each successive president maintained the reformed approach to HOA management, and the culture shift became permanent rather than temporary. Brenda's house sold to a young couple with twins who immediately became active in neighborhood activities. They had no idea about the drama that had occurred, and I decided not to burden them with it. They just knew they had bought into a friendly neighborhood with a reasonable HOA, which was exactly how it should be. The past was the past, and there was no point in poisoning their experience with old stories. The criminal charges and probation period eventually ended for Brenda. I never heard from her directly, though I occasionally wondered if she had learned anything from the experience, or if she was repeating the same patterns in her new community. I hoped for the sake of her neighbors that she had gained some perspective, but I was not optimistic. People like Brenda rarely changed their fundamental nature. What did change was how I viewed conflict and authority. I learned that rules and regulations are only as good as the people enforcing them, and that communities need active participation from residents to keep power in check. I also learned that standing up for yourself often means standing up for others who cannot or will not advocate for themselves. The snow bank that started everything was, in the end, just snow. It melted and was gone within a week. But what it represented the right to use your own property as you saw fit, the right to push back against unreasonable authority, the right to expect fair treatment from your community association, those things mattered deeply. They were worth fighting for, worth spending money on lawyers, worth the stress and the confrontation and the risk. Looking back, I was glad that Brenda crashed into my snow bank. Not because I enjoyed the conflict or wanted her to be arrested, but because it forced a reckoning that our community desperately needed. Her overreach had finally gone too far, and it had happened in such an absurd and undeniable way that people could not ignore it anymore. Sometimes it takes something ridiculous to expose something serious. The legal system worked the way it was supposed to, which was gratifying to see. The police took the vandalism seriously. The courts held Brenda accountable for her actions, and the civil dispute resolution process allowed us to fight back against the fraudulent fines and lien. It was not fast and it was not cheap, but it was effective and fair. That faith in the system felt important to maintain, especially in an era when cynicism about institutions was easy to fall into. I often thought about what would have happened if I had just paid the initial $500 fine and removed the snow bank. It would have been easier in the short term, certainly. But it would have reinforced Brenda's belief that she could bully people into compliance, and she would have continued targeting other homeowners with increasingly absurd violations. My resistance created space for others to resist as well, and that collective action changed everything. The experience also taught me to choose my battles wisely. Not every HOA dispute is worth fighting to the extent that I fought mine. But when someone is clearly in the wrong and clearly abusing their authority and clearly targeting you for personal rather than legitimate reasons, that is when you have to stand firm. The key is knowing the difference between a minor annoyance and a serious violation of your rights. Documentation became my religion after this incident. I kept detailed records of everything related to my property and my interactions with the HOA. I saved every email, photographed every project, and maintained a file of all official correspondence. It was tedious, but it had saved me during the dispute, and it gave me peace of mind knowing that I could back up any claim or defense with hard evidence. The security cameras I installed turned out to be worth far more than their cost. Beyond helping with the Brenda situation, they had captured attempted package thefts, suspicious activity that helped police solve a neighborhood burglary, and one memorable incident involving a deer trying to eat Sarah's prized rose bushes. They were a constant reminder that in any dispute, evidence was king. As time went on, and the drama faded into neighborhood history, I found myself becoming an informal advisor to people dealing with their own HOA problems. Friends from other subdivisions would call me for advice, and I would walk them through the steps. Read your CCRs carefully. Document everything. Try to resolve things reasonably, but do not be afraid to get legal help if the HOA is acting improperly. I probably helped a dozen people navigate their own disputes, and most of them were resolved without needing to go to court. The broader lesson, I realized, was about civic engagement and local governance. Most people ignore their HOAs until something goes wrong, which allows the wrong people to accumulate power. If more homeowners paid attention to board elections, attended meetings, and asked questions about decisions, there would be fewer situations like mine. Democracy requires participation, even at the mundane level of subdivision homeowner associations. Sarah often joked that I should write a book about the experience, maybe something like Surviving Your HOA, a guide to fighting back against petty tyrants. I never did write that book, but I thought about it sometimes. There seemed to be an endless market for HOA horror stories, and mine had the advantage of being both absurd and well documented. The orange spray paint on the snowbank became a symbol in my mind of everything that was wrong with unchecked authority. It was such a petty, vindictive act, done in the middle of the night by someone who genuinely believed she was in the right. That combination of petness and self-righteousness was dangerous in any context, but especially when combined with the power to fine people and place liens on their homes. I never did figure out if Brenda actually believed her own justifications, or if she knew she was being unreasonable and just did not care. Maybe it was some combination of both. She clearly saw herself as protecting property values and maintaining standards, but she had lost any sense of proportionality or fairness along the way. Whatever her motivations, the impact was the same. She made people miserable and abused her position. The reforms we implemented after Brenda's removal became a model for other HOAs in the area. Patricia and I were invited to speak at a regional HOA conference about our experience and how we restructured our governance. It was strange standing in front of a room full of board members and attorneys talking about snow banks and spray paint, but the audience was engaged and asked thoughtful questions. Apparently, our situation was not as unique as I had thought. One thing I made clear in that presentation, and in every conversation about the incident, the goal was not to eliminate HOAs or make them toothless. The goal was to ensure they served their proper purpose of maintaining common areas and protecting property values without becoming instruments of harassment or petty control. A well-run HOA could be genuinely beneficial. A poorly run HOA could make people's lives hell. The difference came down to leadership, oversight, and accountability. I also emphasized the importance of having clear, reasonable rules that were applied consistently. Vague provisions about maintaining appearance or preserving neighborhood character gave board members too much discretion to impose their personal preferences. Specific, measurable standards were better for everyone. If you wanted to restrict something, you should be able to articulate exactly why and document how it affected property values or safety. The snowbank incident happened in January, and by the following January, our neighborhood looked nothing like it had a year earlier in terms of governance and community culture. We had gone from a place where people kept their heads down and avoided attracting attention to a place where people felt comfortable speaking up and engaging with their neighbors. That transformation was worth all the stress and expense of fighting back against Brenda. Sometimes I drove past my house and tried to remember exactly where that snowbank had been. The visual memory had faded over time, replaced by normal lawn and garden beds. But the impact of that temporary pile of snow remained, encoded in changed bylaws, reformed governance structures, and a community that had learned the value of standing together against abuse of authority. I never built another snowbank quite as impressive as that first one. When winter storms came, I cleared my driveway efficiently and piled the snow wherever was convenient, usually along the edges of my property. Nobody complained, nobody took photos, and nobody drove into it. It was amazing how normal and boring snow removal became once you removed the toxic element of someone looking for excuses to harass you. The story of Brenda and the snowbank became my most requested tale at neighborhood gatherings and newcomer welcome parties. I refined the telling over time, emphasizing the absurdity while also highlighting the serious issues underneath. People laughed at the right parts and nodded thoughtfully at the lessons. It bonded our community in a strange way, giving us a shared history of overcoming a common adversary. Looking back years later, I could see how that one morning watching a silver Lexus crash into my snow bank became a pivot point not just for me but for dozens of families in Cedar Ridge. It exposed problems that had been festering, forced conversations that needed to happen, and ultimately made our neighborhood better. Sometimes the most ridiculous incidents have the most serious consequences, and sometimes fighting over something as temporary as a pile of snow can lead to permanent, positive change. I still lived in Cedar Ridge, still served on occasional committees, and still kept my security cameras running. But the constant low-level anxiety about what the HOA might complain about next was gone. In its place was something that felt like actual community, where neighbors looked out for each other instead of looking for violations to report. That was worth more than any pile of snow, no matter how impressively constructed.